Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we'd like to invite you, we'd like to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org. There you can find our blog articles, our show notes for each podcast episode. We have a couple things on a store, and it is kind of the one place that everything that we have is there available. And so we would encourage you to go check that out, studentministryconversations.org. And so the goal of this podcast is to inspire, encourage, and equip youth pastors to be better student pastors in the churches that they're serving in. And that's the goal with this podcast. And we have almost done 200 episodes with that goal, and it's not stopping anytime soon. But with that, we're super excited today to be once again with Jerry Varner. And so with that, Jerry has been on 2 podcast episodes before with us, and both conversations were really, really good. And I think this one is going to be just as good of a conversation. But today we are sitting down to talk about how to transition students from youth ministry to young adult ministry, or out of student ministry, in a healthy way. Because I think a lot of times we fall into this kind of, you graduated and I don't get to have the opportunity or the chance to plug in with you anymore, whether that be distance due to them going to college or whatever. And so, I feel like this is a question that doesn't need to be answered, but just for the sake of covering our ground, Jerry, why is this an issue, and why is it something that we need to address?
Yeah, Brent, first of all, thanks for having me back. I'm always gratified to be invited places, and it's doubly gratifying to be invited back to places. So, third time's a charm, man, and I'm really excited to be. I'm a big fan of the show and all that you're doing and the mission and everything. So, yeah. And congrats on approaching nearly 200 episodes. That is no small feat. That's really,
Yeah,
really
man.
cool.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
about to finish 4 years.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, kudos to you, man. That's awesome. So this topic of helping students transition out of student ministry, it's one that I learned through scars and bruises. And so I'm coming into this conversation with a little bit of a limp because I've been through the heartache of watching a student thrive in community in our student ministry, and the day of graduation like just vaporized. Like what happened? Where did they go? And it's not always that their faith or their spiritual life vaporizes. It's just like they're nowhere to be found. They're someone who was very connected suddenly is not connected anymore. And so I can speak for my local church. Young adult ministry was a black hole, and in talking with different ministry leaders in different churches, I don't think we're alone in that. There was just such a need for effective young adult ministry. So I think you're asking the question, why is this such an important thing? Because I don't think any youth pastor worth their weight has that short-sightedness of saying like, well, all I care is that they love Jesus through 12th grade, and then I don't care. Like nobody's thinking that way. But I do think that we need to do a different. We need to approach student ministry differently than we currently are, and that sounds like an indictment. That sounds, like a scathing, but that's really what I've come to be convicted of as I talk with different ministry leaders. So that's where I'm coming from, and I just want to share through this conversation. I want to share what I have seen, conversations I have had, and maybe most importantly, what I have done, what has worked and what hasn't worked in terms of creating a longevity in the faith journey of our teenagers. Because we're not here to just give them something to do for 6 or 7 years in middle school and high school and then wave goodbye. We're here to build lifelong disciples. So, how does our student ministry build lifelong disciples? That might be a different way to kind of pose the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's something is, you brought up a good point. I mean, youth ministry is not just for busy work. I mean, kids are busy enough.
Yeah.
And so the last thing we need to is just to promote more busyness. But I think there's an interesting dynamic to this conversation because you've been at your church for a long time. You were
Hmm.
the youth pastor. And then as of, we were just talking about this before we got started, as of January, you are now the young adults pastor, but you're also
Right.
kind of overseeing the student ministry team.
Right.
And so
Right.
this puts you in a really, really creative dynamic to tackle both of these issues because you're kind of literally in charge of the transitional phase in your
Right.
church. And so I
Yeah.
think this gives you some tremendous insight. And so as we do that, let's look into it and go from there. But I think you were talking about how youth ministry needs to change.
Hmm.
What specific direction do you have in that? Because obviously, that as a whole is a pretty blanket statement, and
It
I think
is.
you have
Yeah.
some specifics when it comes to that on how and why we need to change things in order for that long lasting discipleship to matter or to be
Yeah.
more important for the life of the student.
Yeah. Um, I think, like anybody, I know what I see, and I know what I hear, and just the different things that I perceive through both through conversations personally, and then through kind of like the way that youth leaders will present their approach to student ministry. And I would suggest, at least just to open up the conversation, I would suggest that maybe we change the metrics of what we consider to be good, solid student ministry. So I would suggest that we first of all start with, how do we measure success in our student ministry? It seems to me, and I'm wide open to being corrected in this. It seems to me that many times we lean in the direction of how many people can we get to an event? How many people can we get to a certain time and place? And then we post that celebration through social media and videos and pictures. And it's kind of like, look at the party we created. Look at the atmosphere and the hype and the lights and the games. I'm not against any of that stuff. I think it all is good, useful tools. It all has its place. But it seems like there's this perpetuation of, this is what really cool, thriving, successful youth ministry looks like. When you can get hundreds of kids into an auditorium and bopping around beach balls and playing loud music, and they're dancing around and they're jumping around. That's student ministry. And I know that that is not the whole picture. I know that we're only perceiving what is presented by different youth leaders. But I would suggest that in addition to who are we drawing in, the more critical question is, who are we sending out? So, to put it succinctly, it's seated versus sent. A lot of youth leaders might look at, how many kids can I get seated in a place and at a certain time, and not think enough about how many of those students are being sent. Like, they understand the commission, they understand what it means to be a true follower of Jesus, to go out into the world and make disciples. And so inadvertently, and this happened to me over time, and inadvertently it kind of creeps in, that I realized that after a while I was way more of an event planner than a pastor. I felt like a cruise ship director, just kind of inviting kids to the next activity rather than helping them see what it really means to look this wild-eyed, crazy Jesus in the eyeballs and say yes to him and follow him in a way that is transformational from the inside out. So this is not me on a pedestal pointing my finger at anybody and saying, like, that was me. That was what I was doing. And I know that there are other youth leaders that they've already settled this. They're down the road with this. But if I can encourage maybe some younger leaders, and just kind of like, just wave my hands in front of them and say, please don't think that a full room or a bunch of teenage butts in seats, don't think that that's the win of student ministry. It has its place, but that's not an effective metric for how are we doing in student ministry. Because what happened in my context is, we created this thriving community, really, really powerful friendships and fellowship, and everybody had a great time. But we made no effort, and this is on me, year after year after year, we made no effort to really connect those young people with the body of Christ, with the kingdom of God, with the mission of God on earth. We simply were giving them somewhere to be and something to do. And yeah, we definitely preached Jesus. We talked about full surrender. We talked about all those things that are so very important, but I didn't have my eye on the long game enough to say, okay, well, what happens when this kid graduates? And the relationships that they have in high school are suddenly gone, and they don't have anybody that they're feeling connected to. So, as a youth pastor, I didn't do a very good job in shoring up that bridge between high school and post high school life. It wasn't a bridge, it was more like just a cliff. Like they just kind of like they got to graduation day and just dropped off, and then they, disappeared. So I'm just inviting other youth leaders to perhaps rethink what they consider to be successful youth ministry.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a big, big ticket. And I think one of the best ways that I've heard it kind of explained as far as a metric that you really need to start kind of grasping, it's not, like you said, it's not about butts and seats, but it's about active growth.
Hmm.
And so if you have 10 students that are actively growing and actively moving towards
Right.
living out a discipleship lifestyle,
Hmm.
that in my ballpark is a much bigger win than having
Hmm.
150 kids that don't know what they're
Sure.
doing.
Sure. Yeah.
Because yes, I'm not saying that the Holy Spirit can't have just magical powers, like magical moments where, like,
Sure.
just they can feel the presence of God in the room. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that doesn't happen, but what I'm saying is I have seen, at least in my ministry, that students are a lot more likely to be open and aware of the presence of God in the room when
Hmm.
kids are encountering Him too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you have kids in your room that are actively and earnestly seeking out God through worship, through
Right.
lessons, asking questions, opening up their Bibles, encouraging each other, and doing those things that, I mean, really, like you said, are those lifelong disciplines.
Yeah.
That's the growth. That's the active growth right there. When you see
Hmm.
those kids taking those steps that allow them to be closer and deeper with God, those
Hmm.
are the moments we need to be measuring.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
To
so,
pu- um, to put it
go for it.
simply, a former pastor of mine, he would say often, if there's two of us who love Jesus, pretty soon there ought to be three of us who love Jesus. And I think
That's
that
good.
talks to exactly what you're saying. So I'm not against crowds. I'm not against numbers. I'm not against those kinds of measurements. I absolutely do think that they have their place, but we have to also ask, not just who is coming in, but who is going out. Like who's going out, understanding that they're on mission, that they're living their
Yeah.
life on purpose.
Well, and I think it's also just this. I think youth pastors have a dilemma of being really, really good at people, getting people in the door sometimes, and not very, very good at harvesting what's there and allowing that to
Hmm.
cultivate. And so, like you said, that can be a dangerous position, but you're basically building a higher and higher cliff for the students to fall off of when they hit
Yeah.
graduation.
Right.
And
Right.
so, one of the things that we have a college kid that's running our college program, and he's been talking about having their own service, and he
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, we just kind of feel like we need our own youth service."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and part of me inside was like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways, it's like, oh, they really just kind of want to go back to high school
Hmm.
where everything was hunky
Yeah.
dory and like they
Yeah.
had their friends and they had this safe
Yeah.
environment and everything, and that's great.
Hmm.
But like,
Hmm.
they're gonna have different moments and different opportunities in their life where that's not gonna be
Yeah.
the case. And I
Right.
think one of the biggest things we have to do, and we've seen goods and bads on this throughout the past couple decades, but we have to like bridge that transitional gap between youth ministry and church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so teach them that, hey, it doesn't have to be lights and sounds and video and
Yeah.
games and stuff like that. Church can be fun,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
it's okay to sit on Sunday mornings in a sanctuary and worship
Yeah.
God too.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that we've done, and this has been a few years now, I think there's a lot of youth pastors who can attest to kind of the monumental Sunday of Grad Sunday on the calendar. That's a big deal. When you
Yeah.
have high school graduates graduating high school, and we do it up, man. Here at our church, we make a big deal. We build the whole thing around celebrating this accomplishment of these graduates, and it is a big deal. But what would happen year after year is that we would see all of these graduates up to this point and this big accomplishment in their life, but then there was nothing that really was there afterwards. I once heard it said that Grad Sunday is the loneliest Sunday for a graduate, because the thing that they had and have enjoyed for many of them many years is now suddenly pulled out from under them, and they don't have any bearings anymore. So a few years ago, we made the switch to instead of student ministry kind of hosting and being the spearhead of Grad Sunday, we turned that over to our young adult ministry. So the vibe of Grad Sunday turned from "you did it, good luck" to "you did it, welcome to the next stage
That's
of your
good.
life." So that was one of the things that we did, and not to mention the young adults who were in charge of preparing and hosting and carrying out Grad Sunday did like not I can't even compare. I look so stupid from my Grad Sundays compared to what they were doing for the graduates. So they did a much better job than I was doing, for years and years and years. So that shift was instrumental. We handed it over to our young adult team, and they completely changed the vibe of Grad Sunday. And they celebrate those students as they graduate, yes, but they also, it's just kind of like this big arms wide open hug from the young adult ministry, kind of like just bringing them into kind of their next leg of the journey in their life. So that was one thing that we have done that really, and it's just, I mean, it's obviously it's one Sunday a year, but we've done that, and we've done several other things. I would love to share more about the things that we've done, because I think it might be, I don't know, it might spur an idea for some other church, because there's got to be at least one youth leader listening to this podcast that's like, yeah, I've been doing that. Like, I see the same thing. I see kids just vaporize after they graduate, and I'm not really
Yeah.
sure what to do about it. Parenthetically, I'm also having this ongoing conversation with young adult ministry leaders from across the country, and there's so many commonalities. So I know that what we're talking about here isn't just theory, and I know it's not an isolated situation. This is a pretty general, common problem that we're seeing in ministries all over the place. So another thing that we do in order to help our students transition well and in a healthy way out of the student ministry is, beginning their junior year, we invite them to a fall retreat that's built specifically for juniors and seniors. So we do a quick overnight thing. We've got a family in our church that has a lake house down in North Carolina, and we just go away for an overnight. And the whole point of that weekend is for our young adults, who, again, they're the ones who host that retreat, for them to speak into, from their young adult perspective, to speak encouragement into those juniors and seniors in high school, and to encourage them to leverage the unique position they have in the youth ministry to be example setters for younger students. Because I think there's a lot of upperclassmen who don't really understand fully the impact, the dynamic impact that they have on eighth graders and seventh graders. And when you're in seventh and eighth grade, the upperclassmen, they're the cool, because that's your next stage of life. So, and likewise, when you're an upperclassman, you're looking at young adults, and they're the cool ones, because they're the ones that's where I'm going next. And so we try and leverage that. We try and use young adults to encourage the high schoolers, to encourage them to invest in the middle schoolers. So in doing that, we're trying to build like a better bridge out of the student ministry, because you know what it's like. Kids actually grow up. They actually don't stay in your youth
Yeah.
ministry for life. They get older, and they grow up, and they graduate, and they leave. So what is it they're leaving to? What is it
Yeah.
they're moving into?
Yeah, and I think that's important. And I love the idea of using young adults from your church community to support that transition. Because I think, like you said, I mean, I think we speaking as youth pastors kind of do a relatively good job in the transition from middle school to high school, because
Yeah.
we have that built-in transition,
Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
oftentimes really rely on those high schoolers to kind of show that
Yeah.
mindset to the junior high of like, man, like when you get here, or we kind of have these like held back perks for like, oh, when
Yeah.
you're in high school, you get this kind of thing. And so it shows a benefit of just different opportunities of things to look forward to. And so
Hmm.
with this, I think this is also something that can be kind of implemented into your church, whether or not you have a group of students or that stay or not.
Right.
I think this is
Right.
something that if you have a college in your town,
Hmm.
then you can still work to implement this program. You don't have to
Yeah.
be the place that they went to youth at.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
obviously, occasionally we all have students that stay in town and go to the local college, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of times is those might have a little extra step because they're the ones that are still plugged in and invested to the church that they've been
Yeah.
going to for most of their
Yeah.
life. And so, but finding these students that are especially on their own out in the middle of nowhere that are still wanting what they had, finding this
Hmm.
moment or opportunity to allow them to have a healthy transition into your church.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge transition moment, and I
Yeah.
think that's really
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
So, how do you? I mean, obviously, like the goal of this is to prepare students for life after student ministry. But is there a certain point in this transition or in their time in ministry where you begin this process? Is this something that is like a senior, like beginning of the senior year, you start doing this, or is this something you start motivating their entire high school career? Is it earlier than that? How does
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah. I would say we're probably 4 to 5 years into this culture change in our local church in kind of shifting from this idea that you just go through youth ministry and then whatever you want to do, goodbye, good luck, to we really start the junior and senior year of really connecting. I would even say our juniors and seniors are kind of the mission field of our young adult ministry. Like they're the target of our young adults, and that's I gotta be very clear. Like not all of our young adults have this mindset. Like, but
Sure.
enough of them do. Like the core enough where the culture of our young adult ministry is so very mindful of wanting to support the juniors and seniors in high school and making them feel welcome. And as they graduate high school and as they make that transition, we want it to be as seamless as possible. We don't want there to be any gaps. We don't want a chasm, a big hole that they fall into. We want it to be just like this seamless handoff from kind of from one context to another. So we start in the practical terms, and I guess like programmatic terms, we start in the junior year. So any junior in high school is welcome to be a part, come to any young adult gathering, or so that we can start to kind of like build that familiarity and they know the faces. Because in our context, we actually have a fair percentage of our young adults that aren't part of our local church. They might go to another local church, but again there's nothing there for young adults, and so we're kind of like we kind of become this like, yeah, you too, we'll take you and you and you. So we kind of become almost like this catch-all of other young adults that have a church home, but they don't have a young adult culture or young adult group in their church. So that's kind of a really cool dynamic that I actually really love. But we have enough of our young adults that have a vision for what we're trying to do in our student ministry, and we have a fair percentage of our young adults. Just because I was the youth pastor for over 20 years, like these are humans that I have known since like elementary school and middle school. Like I was their youth pastor, and now I've kind of like moved into the young adult, and so we're just kind of continuing on that journey together. So a lot of them have a pretty rich history with the student ministry, so they know the dysfunction that was there. Many of them like lived through it. And
Yeah.
many of them experience that cliff, when they graduate high school, and can, even though they're with us today, they can speak very, pointedly and say, that stunk. Like that was a really bad, time in my life because I felt like in the student ministry, I had really everything I wanted, and then I had nothing that I really needed. And that was a really hard shift. So, yeah, but to come back to your question, it really is kind of the junior year that we start to put the pedal to the metal in connecting upperclassmen with our young adult ministry.
Yeah, and how do you go about bridging the gap in the key differences between spiritual needs? Because obviously the needs of a student and the needs of a young adult are going to be
Yeah,
different. They're in different
yeah,
seasons. They're in different, really different chaos moments of their
yeah,
life. They go from
yeah,
I want to be known, I want to be somebody to like, oh, I need people. Like
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
survive. Like I don't. And so you have this like almost shift from identity crisis to
Mm-hmm.
this shift of, man, I don't want to be alone, with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of college students and young adults because they
Mm-hmm.
are kind of tossed out into the world. And so,
Right.
how do you navigate and transition those key differences between student ministry and young adult ministry?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I've got two different types of upperclassmen. There is the upperclassmen that really kind of feels like, for whatever reason, they just kind of feel like they've been in the youth group since middle school, and they're kind of getting, and especially seniors, like they've gotten their acceptance letter, and they're mentally starting to like check out. We've called it senioritis, and they just kind of like mentally start to move on, and so they have already started kind of to become, in a way, a little bit uncoupled from the student ministry, from like, super committed, regular, faithful, being a part. And they're kind of listless a little bit anyway. And so the young adult ministry is a perfect fit for them to at least start to build those bridges, into that next phase. And then we have the another type of student, another type of upperclassman that is thriving in our student ministry, and they're loving their junior year and their senior year, and they're really grabbing opportunities to be able to kind of squeeze everything that they can out of that experience. And they might not be at every young adult thing that we have, but regardless of which type of student that is, we're kind of giving them the same message, that this is your place, this is a place that you're welcome, this is a place that, as soon as you graduate high school, and as much overlap as we can make, we want you to be a part of this. So we're finding that the dynamic that you're talking about, at least in our context, has not really been a problematic thing. Also, we're finding that in our young adult group, I know we're not talking exclusively about young adults, but in our young adult group, there is just the same wide range of spiritual maturity and spiritual curiosity as we saw in the high school. Now they're in a different stage of life, and they might have some of their questions answered, or some of those things nailed down, but really it's kind of a mixed bag anyway. So we have not really found that a senior in high school comes to a young adult group, and everybody in the young adult group is like the Apostle Paul, and the senior is a fish out of water. We haven't really experienced that at all, because we've got dysfunction and hangups and wandering and brokenness in our young adult ministry as well. So this is kind of a maybe a twisted way to look at it, but in that way it really works in our favor, because it breaks down that intimidation factor that a junior or senior might feel. I mean, as much as
Yeah.
we can, coming into a context like that. And, a young adult might be 2, maybe 3 years down the road, but look at, they're still dealing with, certain things. They might not be dealing with the exact same questions as a junior or a senior in high school, but they're still on the journey. And for our local church, like, that's a big part of our culture. There aren't any experts anywhere. There's nobody who has arrived anywhere. We're just walking with Jesus, and we're walking with each other. So that's kind of the tone and the culture that we try and set. And
Yeah.
I think that helps our upperclassmen when they do get involved in kind of post grad life. It helps them kind of like, it's a disarming thing. It's not, they don't have their defenses up or worried about any of that stuff. So
Yeah.
I guess maybe authenticity is kind of the buzzword that might apply there.
Sure. Yeah. Just the mindset of like, okay, you're going through stuff too. Kind of
Hmm.
seeing that in some ways kind of still the mindset of, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
We're all dealing with things. We're all struggling with things. We're all celebrating. We're all hurting. I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely think that's really, really good. And so I guess my final kind of thought and question towards this, and I'm willing to go in any other routes that you had. This is just the last one on my brain. Is obviously this is a great opportunity and a great resource for the ones that are within your congregation, but how can you maintain a relationship with students once they've transitioned out of student ministry, but also out of your town? Does
Hmm.
mentorship continue? And is there methods of follow up? Do you
Yeah.
work on getting them plugged in somewhere else? How does that play out?
Yeah. I have a little, I don't know, a little phrase that I have repeated over the years. Our church is called Southside Church. And so if you're in our student ministry, you're a Southsider. That's just like kind of the name that we call it. That's our social media handle, Southsiders. So I tell kids, once a Southsider, always a Southsider. So even though you graduate high school and you may move clear all the way across the country, I still want to have contact. I still want to show you love. I still want to show you support. I'm still here for you for whatever you need. And I'm privileged. I wish it was more, but I'm privileged to be 51 years old and still have contact with, now adults who are parents of children. I actually have two parents in my youth ministry who were teenagers at one time in my youth ministry. Like their kids now come to our youth ministry. So I've been around that long, and I understand that's a privileged position. But regardless, when a student graduates high school, wherever they go, whatever they do, I want to have established not a relationship necessarily with me, because I can't be the secret sauce to anything, but they have a meaningful connection to their church family. So when they go out into, they move 3 states away and they're going to a state school and their faith is completely falling apart because they went to intro to philosophy and they're thinking things and questioning things they never thought about before. I want there to be such a relationship that they can just call me up or text me or say like, I'm imploding over here and I need some help. On the practical level, on the much less dire scale, what we have tried to do in the past to some degree of success is just keep our graduates who are not in town anymore, keep them in the loop on what is going on. And that might like, hey, I send on Tuesday afternoon, I send a just a truckload of text messages to every young adult on our contact list. And I know that a certain percentage of that list is away at college, and I don't hold back just because I know they're like wherever they're several hours away or whatever. I still want them to know, like, hey, when you do come back for a break, you're wanted. Like you're still in the flow of stuff. So, and honestly, I have not had any students who are away at college. Nobody has said, "Hey, would you stop bothering me?" or "I don't want to know that stuff," or whatever. I think they just really enjoy still having that connection. So that's one way that you can do it. For a while, we were periodically, I think every semester, we would send boxes of just care packages to all of our students who are away at college, just as a way to just show love and can't wait for the next break, can't wait to see you, and here's we're going to get together for coffee on this Saturday night during this fall break or whatever. In doing everything that we can to reiterate that we love you and we're here. It doesn't matter where you go. We're going to love you. We're going to pray for you. We're going to support you. So those are a couple of the things that we've done.
Yeah, no, and I think that's great. I think when we've done bits and pieces of that here and there throughout the years, and for the ones, obviously it's hard to I don't know if this is necessarily the right focus or not. It's a lot easier to keep up with the students that actually want to talk,
Hmm.
and so those are the ones that I definitely, if there's any effort to reach out, then I
Hmm.
definitely return the favor and reach out even when they stop reaching out,
Right.
because they might occasionally text here and there. And so
Yeah.
there are definitely ones that I communicate with regularly because they were the ones that sought after the communication as
Yeah.
well. And I think that's an important aspect. And I try to text others. And
Yeah.
I mean, even shooting a text, like you said, is a huge deal. Inviting
Yeah.
them to come back, or like the coffee idea is a great deal of like, hey, this spring break's next week, Tuesday of spring break, I'm going to be at Starbucks, and
Yeah.
anybody that comes, I'll buy your coffee, kind of thing like that,
Yeah.
just to catch up and visit. And so I think those are all really, really good things. And so the floor is yours. Anywhere else you want to kind of take this conversation? Anything rolling around in your head that you still need to get out?
One of the things that you just said, Brent, reminded me of something else that I do. I use my text list on my phone. That's like my prayer list. So I will open up, and you got all your texts. I will open up my. I'll just go down, and those are the people that I pray for. Now, for me, because I'm a student ministry pastor and young adult pastor, the vast majority of those conversations are with young people. And so I'll just use that, and I'll just pray for Mason, and I'll pray for Christopher. I'm looking right now, Emma and Maddox. I'll pray for those names, and then I will, when I'm done, I'll reach out, and I'll like just text them, hey, just want to let you know I love you. I'm praying for you. Is there anything going on that you need help with? I'm here for you. And I have found that this is kind of a crazy, like the further, because you know what it's like. And if you open up your phone and you scroll on your text conversations, like the further down you go, the longer ago that was. So a
Mm-hmm.
good idea might be to like just give it a couple of good flings and just flip it. It's you get maybe months ago, and you find the name of a young person and you pray for them, and then you reach out to them and said, hey, I know it's been a while since we've talked, but I just want to let you know you're on my mind right now, and I'm praying for you, and I hope you're doing well, and all that stuff. I try and avoid guilt-laden language in my, like,
Yeah.
hey, where have you been, or you missed this event, or whatever. I just want to communicate love and support to them, and
Yeah.
that has really opened up some really cool conversations as well. The only other thing that I think maybe might be a good place to kind of land the plane on the conversation, and it kind of circles back to where we started, is it's good for us. Like I think it's Proverbs. I'm going to get these numbers mixed up. Proverbs 23:27 or 27:23. It says, know the condition of your flock. Pay close attention to the condition of your herd. And I think that's the call to the shepherd. Like we need to
Yeah.
know where they are right now. How are they
Yeah.
doing right now? But in addition to that, what I really want to know is how is that young person 10 years after they graduate high school? Where are they in their faith at that point in their life?
Yeah.
And I think that you can ask that question whether you're on the shorter end of student ministry tenure. I know at one point it was miserably low. I think we've increased it and improved a little bit better. Or you've been in the same place like I have for a really obnoxious amount of time. You can ask that question no matter where you go, because
Yeah.
wherever you are, you're investing in lives, and you have this kind of like this growing list of young people that you care about. So keeping track of like, well, how are they doing with the long game in mind? How are they doing 10 years after graduation, 5 years after graduation?
Yeah.
Where are they now? And working that mentality into your student ministry mindset for today, because you want to build a lifelong disciple. You don't just want to build an event attender, you want
Sure.
to build a disciple. So having those thoughts, where are they 10 years after graduation, and integrating that into what you're doing right now, I have found that's kind of the game changer.
Yeah, no, and that's great. I mean, really good. And I definitely, the other thing with that is, I mean, the phone idea of just like scrolling through and finding names deep into your phone messages is really, really good. I'd say also just like one of the things that I really try to practice is just this mindset of if a kid's name pops in my head,
Oh
I
yeah.
almost immediately text them.
Yeah.
Because
Hmm.
it's one of those things of like, man, why did that just pop into my head?
Right.
I don't know
Right.
what they're dealing with. I don't know what's going on, but I haven't thought of that kid or
Yeah.
thought of that name in
Yeah.
months, if not
Crazy.
years.
Right.
And so you
Yeah.
just have these random inclinations of like, man, wonder how they're doing. And
Yeah.
I almost always follow through on those just for the sake of, you never know. And I've had a couple times where it's been like, man, this week has been absolutely awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I can't believe you reached out this week, kind of thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
just being mindful and kind of reiterating what you said earlier is like, whether it might not be a day by day or a week to week maintenance of the flock that has transitioned out of your program, but you still
Yeah.
they're still going to appreciate the text every now and then that's like, hey,
Yeah.
like I just wanted to check in, see how things were going. Like, would love to see you next time you're in town, kind of thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just the
Mm-hmm.
importance of that is huge. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no. And so, Jerry, just like we've done in the past, any other closing thoughts, and then finally, just the idea of what is one word of encouragement that you'd have for anybody that's listening to this that can be on any topic, doesn't have to be on this specific topic. And then obviously how people can connect with you, and we'll kind of close it out.
Awesome. Yeah. If I could give any encouragement to any leader, volunteer leader, pastor, full-time, part-time, those who God has entrusted you with, what they need more than anything else is that you are genuinely in love with Jesus. I'm in a season in my life when I'm falling back in love with Jesus, and that sounds worse. That's I loved him before, but there's a renewal in my heart right now just because of different things going on in my life and things that I'm seeing around the world and just
Yeah,
conversations that I'm having and books that I'm reading, and so there's a fresh love affair, I guess, or a renewed rekindling of that.
yeah,
And so the people that God is trusting you with, they don't need programs as much as they need you to just model what a love affair with Jesus looks like. So don't get wrapped up in the to-dos. For a long time, I I did so many things for God and left him out of it. And tried to make him proud by doing this long task list of things for his glory, and yet
yeah,
he was no part of it. So being in love with Jesus, and that I don't know how that's coming across to your listeners. It sounds so basic and so rudimentary, but I just want to present that as a reminder for whoever needs to hear it. If you feel like you've kind of devolved into an event planner or a cruise ship director, or just kind of bouncing from one set of logistics for a program to the next set of logistics, and man, I would just say get some time away and unplug and fall in love with Jesus and lead from that place,
yeah,
rather than how many seats can I fill at this
yeah,
upcoming event. And then how to reach me. I'm happy to get for you to share my email. Jerry Varner. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. I have a blog where I kind of post. It's mostly ministry stuff, related stuff. The website is jerrythinks.com. I'm on. I'll always call it Twitter. I know it's called X, but I'll always call it Twitter. I'm on there, Jerry Varner. Anywhere you can just search Jerry Varner, and you'll just
yeah. That's
probably find
awesome.
me. Yeah.
And Jerry has some great thoughts on there. Jerry's also written, he's also had a blog on our website, an open letter to senior pastors. And so you should definitely check that out as well. But Jerry is definitely, he is a Yoda when it comes to youth ministry because he's been in it longer than most people. And it's always a privilege to have Jerry back on and just get to talk shop and talk life and everything else. But as this is kind of relatively a new season for you, as you were saying, Jerry,
Hmm.
we our prayer is that you keep on keeping on, and who knows, maybe you come back in another 100 episodes and we talk about
Yes.
how this has transitioned and
Yeah.
how it went from where it started to where it is 100 episodes or so from now.
Yeah. Let's do it.
But yeah, it's always fun to have you on. And for anybody listening to this episode or listening, thank you so much. We thank you for
Hmm.
taking the time out of your day to make this something that is worth listening to. And all we ask is that you can do for us is that we just ask that you would share our podcast to the greater student ministry audience. You can do that on any of the social media platforms. At Talk Student Men is our handle. We would love for you to do that. Or if a podcast episode like this one with Jerry specifically stood out and you're like, man, I know a youth pastor that could hear that, man, share it up. That is how we don't do advertisements. We don't do anything but word of mouth. And so our podcast is straight up just being told from one youth pastor to another. And we're, like I said, we're almost 200 episodes in, 16,000 something views. And so with that being said, it's a privilege, it's an honor to do this week to week, and I feel like this has been a big blessing for me and an opportunity to learn. And so thank you for continuing to listen. And then finally, if you want to be like Jerry and be on the show, you can message us at Talk Student Men on social media, or you can reach out to us podcast@studentministryconversations.org. And we'd love to set up a time for you to come on the show as well, because we feel like every youth pastor has a voice and we can learn from everybody. And so if that's you and you have something on your heart that you want to share, let's set up a time so you can be on the show as well. And we look forward to that opportunity. But Jerry, thanks again, man. This is awesome. Love you, love the ministry you do. And man, I just appreciate all that you've done for your church and your community and for student ministry people across the board. But always fun, always a privilege, and I'm excited for people to hear this episode. And so that is all we have for this episode. We hope that you have a fantastic week, and we will see you next time.